I want to talk to you tonight about something that surfaced 48 hours ago and has sent shockwaves through Tel Aviv, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is a leaked diplomatic memorandum that multiple intelligence services are now working to verify, suppress, or weaponize depending on their strategic interests. What this document reveals is that the Trump administration has been conducting back-channel negotiations with Iran for the past 11 months, negotiations that contradict every public statement, every sanctions enforcement action, and every military posture the White House has maintained since January 2025. I am looking at excerpts from this memorandum that were published by The Intercept yesterday afternoon and subsequently confirmed by two separate sources within the European diplomatic community who spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity. What these excerpts show is not a preliminary dialogue. It is not exploratory conversation. What they show is a structured framework agreement covering nuclear enrichment limits, sanctions relief timelines, regional security guarantees, and energy export arrangements that would fundamentally restructure the balance of power in the Middle East. And Israel was not informed. Saudi Arabia was not consulted. The entire security architecture that the United States has built over 30 years in the Gulf was bypassed. In the next 22 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what this leaked agreement contains, why Netanyahu's coalition is fracturing over the revelation, why Saudi Arabia and the UAE are now openly questioning American reliability, and why this might be the most significant shift in Middle East diplomacy since the Abraham Accords collapsed in 2024. This is what happens when strategic interests override ideological commitments. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to analyze is being debated in the Knesset, the Israeli cabinet, and the U.S. National Security Council at this very moment. Let's start with the timeline because it reveals everything. In June 2025, approximately 5 months after Trump's inauguration, a series of meetings were arranged in Muscat, Oman, between American officials and Iranian representatives. Oman has historically served as the neutral intermediary for U.S.-Iran communications, the same role it played during the original JCPOA negotiations in 2015. According to the leaked memorandum, the American delegation was led by Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, not a State Department official. This is critical. Witkoff reports directly to Trump, bypassing Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the traditional diplomatic apparatus. The Iranian delegation was led by Ali Bagheri Kani, Iran's deputy foreign minister and chief nuclear negotiator, the same official who negotiated with the Biden administration before talks collapsed in 2023. The presence of Bagheri Kani signals that these were not informal discussions. This was a formal negotiation with the authority of the Supreme Leader's office behind it. Between June 2025 and April 2026, these delegations met 7 times, 7 documented meetings over 11 months. According to the memorandum, the meetings covered 4 primary areas: nuclear enrichment caps, sanctions relief, regional security, and energy export guarantees. Let me be extremely precise about what the leaked text reveals in each area because the implications are staggering. Announcement number 1, the nuclear enrichment framework. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents a complete reversal of Trump's maximum pressure campaign and contradicts every public statement the administration has made about Iran's nuclear program. The leaked agreement proposes that Iran cap uranium enrichment at 60% purity, well below the 90% threshold required for weapons-grade material but significantly higher than the 67% limit established in the original JCPOA. In exchange, the United States would lift secondary sanctions on Iranian oil exports, allowing Iran to sell crude on international markets without penalties on foreign purchasers. Current Iranian oil production is approximately 2 million barrels per day. Under sanctions, roughly 80% of that goes to China at heavily discounted prices. Lifting secondary sanctions would allow Iran to access European and Asian markets at market rates, potentially adding $40 to $50 billion annually to Iranian government revenue. The agreement also includes a verification protocol where the International Atomic Energy Agency conducts quarterly inspections of declared facilities, but notably, it does not require access to military sites, one of the key points of contention that collapsed previous negotiations. Iran's Parchin military complex, long suspected of hosting nuclear weapons research, would remain off-limits under this framework. According to David Albright, a former UN weapons inspector and president of the Institute for Science and International Security, speaking to the Washington Post this morning, and I am quoting him directly here, this agreement effectively legitimizes Iran as a threshold nuclear state. 60% enrichment gives them the technical capability to sprint to a bomb in under 90 days if they choose to break out. That is not non-proliferation. That is managed proliferation, received. That is announcement number one. Now, here is where the situation becomes exponentially more complex and where Israel's response shifts from anger to panic. The leaked memorandum includes a regional security provision that has not been publicly discussed by any party until now. Announcement number two, the Regional Security Guarantee. This is the section that has reportedly caused three members of Netanyahu's cabinet to threaten resignation and triggered emergency consultations between Tel Aviv and Washington. The agreement includes language committing the United States to recognize Iran's security interests in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. The exact phrasing, according to the leaked excerpt, states that the United States acknowledges Iran's legitimate concerns regarding threats to its territorial integrity and agrees to refrain from supporting activities that destabilize Iranian allies in the region. That is diplomatic language. In plain terms, it means the United States would cease support for opposition groups in Syria, reduce military coordination with Kurdish forces in Iraq, and limit intelligence sharing with Saudi Arabia regarding Houthi operations in Yemen. For Israel, this language is a strategic catastrophe. Iran's allies in the region include Hezbollah in Lebanon, various Shia militias in Iraq, the Assad government in Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen. These groups represent the primary threats to Israeli security on its northern border, in the Golan Heights, and through missile and drone attacks launched from Syria and Lebanon. If the United States formally recognizes Iran's security interests in these countries and commits to reducing support for groups that threaten Iranian allies, Israel loses its most important partner in containing Iranian regional influence. Netanyahu's office released a statement 18 hours ago describing the leaked agreement as a betrayal of the U.S.-Israel alliance and a fundamental threat to Israeli security. The statement, which was unusually blunt for official Israeli communications, stated that any agreement that legitimizes Iranian entrenchment in Syria and Lebanon is unacceptable, and that Israel reserves the right to act unilaterally to defend its citizens. That is code. That means Israeli military strikes on Iranian positions in Syria and Lebanon, regardless of American approval. Stay with me because this is where the dominoes start falling and where the broader implications for regional stability become impossible to ignore. Announcement number three, Saudi Arabia and the UAE were not informed of these negotiations until after the leak. This is the part that fractures the Gulf security architecture and calls into question every American security commitment in the region. According to reporting by the Wall Street Journal this morning, which cited officials from both Saudi and Emirati governments, neither Riyadh nor Abu Dhabi were briefed on the substance of the U.S.-Iran negotiations. They were aware that back-channel talks were occurring. That is not unusual, but they were not told that a comprehensive framework agreement was being developed. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman learned the details of the agreement from the same leaked document that the rest of the world saw. The same is true for the UAE leadership. Think carefully about what this represents. Saudi Arabia has spent more than $500 billion on American weapons systems over the past decade. The UAE hosts American military bases and has oriented its entire defense procurement strategy around interoperability with U.S. forces. Both countries joined the Abraham Accords and normalized relations with Israel based on American assurances that Iran would remain contained through sanctions and pressure. And now they discover that the United States has been negotiating an agreement that lifts sanctions, legitimizes Iranian regional influence, and provides Tehran with billions in additional revenue, all without consulting them. The Saudi response has been swift and unmistakable. Within 24 hours of the leak, Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan held calls with his counterparts in China, Russia, and Turkey. Not the United States. China, Russia, and Turkey. That is not protocol. That is a signal. Bloomberg reported this morning that Saudi Arabia is exploring alternative security partnerships and reconsidering its reliance on American defense guarantees. One Saudi official, speaking anonymously to Reuters, stated, "If Washington can negotiate our security away without telling us, then we need to find partners who will not negotiate our security away without telling us." Received. That is announcement number three. Now let's talk about why Trump would pursue this strategy, because the conventional wisdom that Trump is reflexively anti-Iran and pro-Israel does not explain what we are seeing. The answer is energy markets and domestic politics, and once you understand those two factors, the entire strategy becomes clear. Trump's primary concern is not Middle East stability. His primary concern is American energy dominance and gasoline prices in swing states. Iranian oil exports, if sanctions are lifted, add roughly 2 million barrels per day to global supply. That additional supply pushes crude prices down, which lowers gasoline prices in the United States. Lower gas prices improve Trump's approval ratings and increase his chances of maintaining Republican control of Congress in the 2026 midterms. The political calculation is ruthlessly transactional. Cheaper gas in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona matters more to Trump's political survival than Israeli security concerns or Saudi displeasure. The second factor is Trump's belief, consistent throughout his political career, that large-scale deals and dramatic diplomatic breakthroughs enhance his legacy and his brand. Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He has made that explicit in interviews. A comprehensive agreement with Iran, framed as solving a problem that eluded Obama and Biden, would be exactly the kind of legacy-defining achievement Trump craves. The fact that it undermines alliances, destabilizes regional security, and legitimizes a hostile regime is secondary to the optics of the deal itself. Netanyahu understands this, which is why his coalition is fracturing. Right-wing members of his government, including National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, are demanding that Netanyahu publicly denounce the agreement and threaten to strike Iranian nuclear facilities unilaterally if the deal moves forward. Centrist members of the coalition are warning that such threats would destroy what remains of the U.S.-Israel relationship and isolate Israel diplomatically. Netanyahu is caught between two irreconcilable positions: accept an agreement that threatens Israeli security or defy the United States and risk losing American military aid and diplomatic cover. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are recalculating their entire strategic orientation. If the United States can abandon its Gulf allies to secure cheaper oil and a diplomatic win, then American security guarantees are worthless. Both countries are now exploring defense partnerships with China, technology transfers with Russia, and diplomatic frameworks with Turkey and Pakistan that do not depend on American reliability. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and the outcome is always the same. Let me take you back to 1979, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The United States, seeking to bog down the Soviet military in an unwinnable conflict, armed and funded Mujahideen fighters through Pakistan. Billions of dollars in weapons, training, and intelligence support flowed into Afghanistan for a decade. The Soviets eventually withdrew in 1989, exhausted and defeated. And what happened next? The United States abandoned Afghanistan. The Mujahideen fractured into warlords and extremist groups. Pakistan was left to manage a destabilized neighbor flooded with weapons and radicalized fighters. The Taliban emerged from that chaos. Al-Qaeda found sanctuary there. And on September 11, 2001, the consequences of that abandonment came home. The parallel is direct. The United States is pursuing a transactional agreement with Iran that serves immediate American interests, cheaper oil, a diplomatic win, and is abandoning its long-term allies in the Gulf. Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are being told that their security concerns are secondary to American domestic politics. And what happens when those allies decide they can no longer rely on American guarantees? They seek alternative partnerships. They develop independent military capabilities. They pursue nuclear programs. The entire regional security structure that prevented nuclear proliferation and contained Iranian influence begins to collapse. Who benefits? China, which has brokered agreements between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China, which is building infrastructure across the Gulf and signing long-term energy contracts. China, which does not lecture its partners about democracy or human rights, and does not abandon them when political winds shift in Beijing. As American credibility erodes, Chinese influence expands. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 scenarios, because the next 60 to 90 days will determine which path we go down. Path 1, the deal collapses under political pressure. Netanyahu mobilizes the pro-Israel lobby in the United States to pressure Congress. Republican senators who support Israel introduce legislation blocking sanctions relief. Saudi Arabia and the UAE threaten to cut defense contracts and reconsider basing agreements. The political cost becomes too high, and Trump walks away from the agreement, blaming Iran for unreasonable demands. The status quo persists. Sanctions remain. Tensions remain. And everyone pretends the leak never happened. Likelihood, 35%. Politically difficult but possible if Netanyahu can generate enough pressure in Congress. Path 2, Trump pushes the deal through despite opposition. He frames it as a historic breakthrough, claims credit for lowering gas prices and solving a decades-old conflict, and dismisses Israeli and Saudi concerns as short-sighted. Iran gets sanctions relief. Netanyahu's coalition collapses, and Israel pivots to unilateral military action against Iranian targets in Syria and Lebanon. Saudi Arabia and the UAE accelerate their pivot toward China. American influence in the Middle East enters terminal decline. Likelihood, 40%. Fits Trump's personality and political strategy, but carries enormous geopolitical risk. Path 3, a modified agreement emerges. The nuclear framework remains, but the regional security language is softened or removed. Israel and Saudi Arabia are brought into the negotiation, not as partners but as observers, and offered concessions to secure their acquiescence. Iran accepts a less comprehensive deal because sanctions relief alone is valuable. Everyone claims victory, and the can gets kicked down the road. Likelihood, 25%. Requires skillful diplomacy and compromise, neither of which are Trump's strengths. I think we are heading toward path 2. Trump is committed to this agreement because it serves his political and legacy goals. He will dismiss opposition from Netanyahu and the Saudis as predictable and manageable. And the consequences, regional instability, nuclear proliferation, the erosion of American alliances, will emerge slowly enough that Trump can claim they are someone else's problem. Here are the questions I want you to think about. First, if the United States can negotiate away Israeli and Saudi security without consulting them, what does that mean for the value of an American alliance? Second, how do regional actors respond when their primary security partner proves unreliable? Third, what happens when countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey conclude that the only way to guarantee their security is to develop their own nuclear capabilities? Tell me in the comments whether you think Trump should push this deal through or walk away. Tell me if you believe Netanyahu can stop this agreement through Congress or if his influence in Washington has diminished. Tell me what you think Saudi Arabia does next, because that decision will shape the next decade. We will keep tracking every development, every leak, every diplomatic response as this situation unfolds. That is what this channel does. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone trying to understand what is actually happening behind the headlines. Turn on notifications because this story is moving fast, and we will see you in the next briefing.